All right. Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to Virtual Thursdays, Dire Literary Series and True Crime Podcast, apparently. And my guest is a wonderful poet, professor at Hunter College, Ellen Kombiyil. Is that correct?
Kombiyil.
Kombiyel. All right.
You were close.
I'm so sorry.
That's
But
okay.
let me tell you something about Ellen. Even though I can't pronounce it properly, I can definitely do her bio, and her bio is wonderful. So, let me uh let me get to it. Um, all right. There it is. So Ellen is the author of Histories of the Future Perfect in 2015, a micro chapbook, Avalanche Tunnel, and her book, which came out in September 2024, Love as Invasive Species, is out from Cornerstone Books. Recent work has appeared in forthcoming in New Ohio Review, Nimrod, North American Review, and the wonderful Ploughshares. She is the 2022 recipient of Brio Award. Bronx recognizes its own is what it stands for. From the Bronx Council of the Arts, a two-time winner of the Mary M. Fay Poetry Award from Hunter College, a recipient of an Academy of American Poets College Prize, and was awarded the Nancy Dean Medieval Prize for an essay on the acoustic quality of Chaucer's poetics. Graduate of the University of Chicago and Hunter's MFA program. She currently teaches writing at Hunter College. And welcome, Ellen.
Thank you so much for having me.
This is going to be, I'm looking forward to your reading, and I'm going to turn it over to you for reading, and then we'll chat a bit.
Perfect. So, yes, my book came out in September. It's labor of love, as they all are. And I want to take a moment to the spectacular art is by a New York City native, Meiko Kikuchi, and she designed it based on like these are all things that appear in the book, all the flora and fauna. And the book is a Tepbesh, which is a head foot book. So you read it into the middle, and then it meets with two poems with the same title, sort of mirroring each other, and then you flip the book over and you read it back out the other way. So it's got a back cover, also like two front covers, if that makes sense. So, and the poems all mirror and respond to each other in list order. So there's a side A, and then the poems would correspond to the same one in the list order, like on side B. So to give a sense of sort of that, and you can read it however you want, like it's meant to be sort of a choose your own adventure type of thing. It makes sense to read just side A. I've given a lot of attention to how the poems progress, but you could also like hopscotch, like read side A, then flip over and read the corresponding poem on side B, because they're kind of in dialogue with each other. So what I thought I would do is read four poems, and I'll read side A and its corresponding side B and do that one more time. So two from each side, if that makes sense. So the first poem I'm going to read is called Birthday. And basically the book is it's about my stories along my maternal family line. I was noticing a lot of patterns that were like kind of really stark and kind of startling in how much they repeated, almost like very similar, exactly, like not necessarily good patterns, like domestic violence would like repeat down the family line, and like abandonment of a pregnant wife, children sort of like left to be raised by others, like that sort of thing. And I was really curious as to how these things get passed down. So I did a lot of interviews. Some of these are imagined things, some of these are things from my life, but the women in my family make appearances in these poems. So that's like the basic project of the book. The first one I will read is called Birthday, and all of the poems, most of them have a shadow title, which would help you correspond to the side B poem. So the shadow title for this is called Pastoral, which was also an apt title for this poem. Birthday. We ate burgers bloody, buns toasted in grease, and where teeth split the meat, Red dribbled down our chins onto the grass. August and the ghost moon shone without the sun having set. Bees pummeled my head, so I'd get up and run, sit down again, slather butter on corn, get up, circle and duck, hand slap thigh, slap foot. The buried cat sprouted a raspberry bush. Nothing with thorns, Ma said, but that bush was an exception. My sister sat calm when a bee brushed her cheek. Like a statue, she said. But the world is a breathing place. Tulips dropped petals, and the inner eyes of stalks stained fingertips. That night we whispered, my sister and I, through grill work, labyrinth of heating ducts that connected us. Ma's love cries echoed through the house. I baked a cake, ransacked the cupboard to cover it in sugared hearts. How sweet it was, feasting like that in the dark. And then if I read the corresponding poem on side B, it's called Pastoral. Such greenness, the lawn, bent back blades and dewdrop sequins stitched in sequence replicate the fly's eye tweed of my dress. Here I am, Mama, amplified the way you always wished. Lawnmower ripcord starts up, the kind that tugs, gasoline rich, the kind that swipes off toes, like when cousin Linus sprinkled the grass with his flesh. And then back to side A. Love song with contradictions. What were you listening to, great grandma, down at the lake, that Saturday night when you felt you couldn't breathe? Not those low riders, waxed and raring, but the way souped up carburetors suck oxygen to drag along the strip, your gulping breaths, gurgling, ineffective. The ambulance fetched you. In the hospital, they lopped off your thick braids to think you never grayed, for convenience or to ease sweating. Grandma brought them home, kept them in a candle box next to her bed. Each night, she'd slide back the lid and touch them. The surprise of it, oh, sorting the clutter after the house sold, Ma found them under the sink next to the Brillo pads. It was unexpected, not the way, as a girl, when I first touched myself, thought, I'll die from this. More like a child wandering aisles of jarred foods who looks up and can't spot her mother, howls a siren of rage. Love is not a boat moored on a lake that bobs on waves, more like a house, its foundation drilled into bedrock that in an earthquake still shakes. Can you explain this inheritance? Grandma nodded to her bed so she won't sustain a fracture. Oh, to be found but never claimed, picking bright pink cherries, not for glitz, but for sweetness. Pay attention, Ma said. Keep up. And the side B poem has the same title. It's also called Love Song with Contradictions. And it has two lines that I borrowed from Bernadette Mayer. On the avenues, white exhaust tinges blue. A pigeon nearly gets me perched over the red church door. For lunch, I pack a ham and turkey sandwich. I want to hose the city down with bleach. Mostly images don't form patterns, or they do. It's my mind arranging them, giving an impression of continuity, not unlike the man with a serpentine walk I've avoided all my life, looking down at my shoes. When I say the man, I don't mean my father. Of course, I'm told we walk alike. From behind, we have the same stooped cadence, arches collapsed, soles worn on a slant. Is that him that just passed? I don't like cooking dinner. I get bored listening to my husband's yakety yak. I have to send my meeting notes in the morning, he says. I stir fry the tofu, get distracted by the inner turmoil of paying rent and what it means to be a good person. In another place, or through window tint, it appears to be raining on asphalt. Storm pipes branch beneath swarming feet. We weave around each other like flamingos on takeoff or just before dancing, each of us moving in unison, a dot on the GPS. Little dot, move left. Little dot, don't move, just blink in vertical space, going up the office escalator, toting coffee in a paper cup. Little dot, plugged with earbuds. Riding backwards on trains where time lapsed, or we flicker like flamingos mating in the infrared, each orange splotch with a yellow heart pulsing at once above, below, and it's easier for love to have a million neighbors seems a breezy thing to say, appropriate, not slutty, our mouths sucking frenzy. Yet, like zebrafish, we zag in blue swaths, flashing eyes, lacing fins. In fact, yes, I'm avoiding the text, just in from my landlord asking, where is the rent? Thank you so much. This was such a pleasure to read with you.
Thank you. It's great to hear you. Let me join you here. Well, hello there.
Hi.
So I love the the book, how it's set up. Um, was that originally the intention of it, or did it just sort of develop into that?
It developed into that because, I mean, it sort of makes sense given I'm talking about family patterns, right? So I kept writing into these stories or experiences, and I would get like different ways into them or different sort of modes of exploring the material. And I ended up like having a lot of poems that sort of were speaking to each other. And but I didn't understand yet about this flipping. It seemed that that was the part that was sort of hidden from me. Like originally I was noticing I had like a side A and a side B, but they didn't flip. They just had like even numbers of poems. Um, but then suddenly I just had this idea. I'm like, wait, it's sort of like a labyrinth trying to figure out these stories and the patterns of them and what it means and experiencing it. It's sort of like you're trying to find your way through. You get to the middle and then you're kind of like trying to find your way out. And it feels like I like the physical book, and having to interact with it felt like an important intervention. So once I figured out that I wanted it to move and be like an object that you had to contend with, it just sort of like announced itself. Like I had the interior poems are both called to scribble down the bright magenta, begin again in the begot begun. And they're kind of really fun. I had one that I really loved that was called that. And then I was like, well, if I'm going to end, because originally like the book wanted to like one section ended there. And I'm like, well, what if I needed a mirror and I wanted it to have the exact same title and be, and it's a sonnet and I wanted them to like look the same. So I realized that I had written another poem that could have that title that was already a sonnet, and I just sort of had to make some tweaks to it. And then it just was like, you know how you just know? Then I knew that the book was done.
I
Um,
absolutely love that. And for like literary folks that will totally geek out about that, what about the average reader, Robert wants to know? Is the average reader willing to flip the corresponding poem in the back, in the center, or what is their response? Are they willing to manipulate your book?
I mean, I've had different reactions from people. Mostly find people just like to find, and I'm like, as soon as I just say, just read it how you want. Like, there's really like, I don't think there's a wrong way to read it. I know some people just flip through books and read randomly. Also, you would get the sense of it, but you kind of can experience it differently. Like I know people that have done it both ways, and then they've reported back that they've found like they have a different relationship to the material, just having read it straight through side A, straight through side B, and then doing the flipping. It depends on how much time you want to devote to it, but it's kind of like Easter eggs are there for anybody that wants to play with it.
Yeah, I think people are fearful of doing it incorrectly and not getting the true meaning. Like I won't go into a corn maze for the same reason. I'll just panic.
There's no wrong way. It's poetry, so make of it what you will.
So I can't help but notice, are you a music lover? Because the old vinyls, side A and side B, and the artist lays it out in a certain order. Was that under consideration at all?
For sure. I mean, I grew up, in the 70s, and that's how I listened to my music. It was a big part of my experience. And then I missed it. I missed it when we went all digital. And then I still have a record. I still collect vinyls, and I prefer to listen to music that way.
Yes. So also with that, did you find when you were doing side A and side B, something that started out on side A ended up on side B? Like, how did you determine the thematic nature of the two sides of the book?
Mm, that's a good question. Thank you. Because I really wanted it, I didn't want it to feel like a gimmick. Like that felt really important to me. Like it's not like it we really needed to have the integrity of needing this for the book to feel done. But I didn't have that issue really because I had spent so much time like figuring out the order. And I really think that the order, if you read it through like side A, you'll start to see like images are next to each other. So if you read just side A through, it makes, even though it skips around in time, like it's not chronological, it in terms of like there's an image that will repeat, or the idea of leaping in one image and then there's a leaping girl in the next poem. Like there's a through line that makes logical sense. So side A was really like cohesive and needed to be there. And then it was a matter of, does it make sense without forcing it that these poems really are speaking to each other? And I realized like some of the poems shared names already, but then I realized, oh, this could really like birthday could really be called pastoral. And then I started noticing all of that. Like if they could share a name or have a shadow title, um, then they belonged together.
Was there any confusion about, I mean, did you have to put the shadows in later? Is there any confusion with having or with your publisher as well, having poems of the same title?
No, we just really I had a Zoom call with the publisher doing the layout because they were like, how do you want it to look? Basically was like originally like I had sort of played with the title and then like a semicolon and then in grayscale, but we just decided to make it really simple. And the table of contents was kind of confusing. That was the biggest issue because originally the table of contents was like side A and then it would show the corresponding poem on side B so you could like look at it, but it was too much for, a book this size. So we just have side A has its own table of contents, side B has its own table of contents, and it's up to you to
Now, you never decided to try to set up as an 8 track with like 4 seconds of delay in the middle of the poems?
no. That would be like I'm kind of
For you
like I
kids out
love
there, an 8 track?
kind of fun like book projects that could be weird objects. Like I mean, like, sure, that would be fun.
So the art on your wall behind you, is that the book cover? And is it the
That's
same artist?
no, that's
It
my
is so similar. Let me see if I'll eliminate myself so people can get a bigger view of it.
here, I'll bring you closer. No,
It's
it's
similar in
sort of
style, very much as your cover, I feel.
a little, maybe I was just channeling it. Um, yeah, because she's got a headdress with flowers in it, but she's sort of cubist. She's got two noses. She's sort of looking to the side and looking at you.
Are
But
you a big
that's
are you a big fan of Picasso's?
I do. I mean, I like Picasso. Sure, he was an influence when I was younger, but I mean that just like a poem, like I do visual art too, but just like a poem, it's the same process of just you just work with the materials you have. I don't know how you write poems. I would love to hear how your audience write poems too, but for me, it's like, usually it's like some language is there that I'm interested in, or some image, or something with language, with the tools of writers, and then it develops out of following whatever it is that has interested me about that piece of language. It's the same with art. Like I'm just like, I didn't plan on making a dual-sided woman. It just sort of needed to develop that way. And you're just sort of following where it's taking you.
So it sounds like you already answered Lee's question about being a poet and an artist and how does it connect to your poetry. Let's talk a little bit about the subject matter in this recent book. It's all family related, correct? You didn't do any like generalizations around women and their trauma, or is it just straight from personal experience and history?
Well, I mean, I was interested in understanding how this could occur. And I think it would, if it's occurring in my family, I'm sure it's occurring, we're not unique. So I started with what I knew and like sort of my experience growing up. And then I was interviewing, like I also remember just hearing stories, and I didn't start knowing a lot of the details because there's sort of those people don't like to talk about it, but you would hear these weird things. And then I started pressing because I'm like, wait, what was that? And then you would hear different versions from different people. And then I would like keep interviewing and try to find out what was happening there. But I was trying to connect it. In fact, there's a chronology in the back of the book. I don't know if you know Rita Dove's Thomas and Beulah. I mean, that was when that book came out, it was such a huge influence on me that it's one of my favorite books ever. But she has a chronology in the back, which was showing like her family history. And then interspersed with that is like the laws that were unfair around like how her family was contending with these unfair laws. And I felt like because this book is not in chronological order, that because of the side A, side B, you're skipping around in time, it would be really useful to have a chronology and this is what it looks like, of the women when they were born, because I'm naming some of them.
That's
And then
cool.
I'm also, similar to what Rita Dove did, I'm putting in there like pieces of legislation, what was happening at the time. Like at the time that my great grandmother was pregnant with my grandmother, she became like, her husband left. Well, she left her husband, then she found out she was pregnant, and then she was scared because this was like early 1900s, to raise a child herself and what that meant, and the difficulty of that. So then she reached out to her husband that she had left, who was abusive, and said, I found out I'm pregnant. Will you come back? And he refused. So then she was left with, needing to figure out how to do it. And she had to work, and she had to put my grandmother into orphanage and then get her out when she kept going in and out of orphanages. So this was my grandmother's story. I knew pieces of it, and then I had to like really find out all the details. But when you know that, but then if you put it into context with, there's money that was provided in 1929 for maternity and childcare for women, but they let that lapse around the time that my grandmother was born, which means she was needing to be put in orphanages and she couldn't be cared for. So in between all of the stories of what's happening to the women and trying to make what they can out of their lives, the uphill battle of, women couldn't have an apartment if they left their husbands, right? In the 1970s, it became law where they didn't need a cosigner or could even have credit. These were like lived experiences that I think people forget, that this is like we're still alive when these laws were enacted.
Well, the laws that are going on today, or they want to go on today, we're not that further away from it. So, like,
We're
do you,
going back,
yeah, do
right?
you ever feel like instead of writing a poem about it, that you just would rather write an FU poem to your legislative?
I mean, I think you can do both, right? I think I teach undergrads, right? So I feel like it's really like just being with them, and my kids are around the age of the students that I teach. Like it's my job as a parent to be like it's easy to grow up and be like 19 and not realize that this is lived history. Like I remember my mother like in Sears, and she couldn't get credit to get like what she needed to get for us to live, like to buy a pan or whatever, because she was an unmarried woman,
Tough
right?
skin jeans.
I remember this. So, I mean, and if you're 20 years old and you're not thinking about it, you just think what you see ahead of you has been what it always is. But this is like lived recent memory that we have, and it's not that far removed from where we are. It's so easy to see how quickly it could be taken away. And I feel like we need these poems, we need these chronologies, we need like this awareness out into the world, and also we need to write our legislators.
So when I was doing a little research for this interview, I went down the rabbit hole of rate your professor, and I'm not going to get very specific, but your students say there's too much reading. Do you feel that's because young people don't read? Is it too much reading, or is it just their lens that they're going through?
Well, first of all, I'm not a huge fan of Rate My Professor
Nobody
because,
is.
well, I mean, I get better feedback. Like Rate Your Professor is just like anybody could go on there. So it could be a student that dropped my class because they cheated or whatever, and then they're salty, right? And then they write weird stuff. There's some stuff that I'm like, I don't even know what this person's talking about. What's more effective for me is like they have students in the class are asked on Hunter, like, and I get to see that feedback, and they're like, they're known students that were registered for your class rather than just somebody who I don't know,
Randos.
randos. But I do get that a lot. People complain that there's too much reading. I mean, I'm an English professor. We're gonna read. Um,
Exactly.
yeah, no, I try to even it out. I try to let them know when there's a little more. I do my best, but I'm not gonna reduce the reading because it's necessary.
Now, I'd love to go back to your past when you lived in India and the poetry there, but I think we're running out of time. So I'd rather ask you this one, even though I'd
Okay,
rather ask you both of them.
sure.
So the next book you're working on, you're researching with Life magazine from the 40s. I used to collect Life magazine, so this is
Hmm.
cool. You're researching a 1921 ROTC manual. And also, various things. Do you consider, including the historic nature of your current book, do you consider yourself like a poet slash historian? And what's your relationship with history in general?
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's fun to look at like what your interests are. And, this was a very, obviously this started with personal history, but I'm looking at putting it into context to like the lived lives and what's happening in the world. And I feel like my question for this book is like, how is knowledge inherited? Like, how is it passed down? Like these traumas or like this way of being was passed down, and there's certain things that aren't taught well, right, to the women in the family, or they have, or how to navigate unfairness isn't taught well. Something's been missed in the knowledge cycle. And I feel like even though I'm doing this totally different thing with I'm looking at war basically, and I'm trying to like look at how we document in this country war. So I'm looking at Life magazine during World War II.
Mhm.
I also have a guidebook for Marines from 1957. It's all like the machinery of war. And then I was looking, I'm also erasing from the Iliad, which is, of course, the in the Western canon, the Great War epic. It seems to me a similar question of like, how are we talking about war? What is the inherited like attitude towards war, starting from the Iliad and heroics and what it is to be a man and defend, that we've just sort of digested and maybe need to re-examine. And so that it feels like this a similar question, just the lens towards something different.
Well, I really, really love talking to you and hearing you read. That was awesome. That was a lot of fun. I totally love how the book is produced and, your perspective of it. And for folks at home, here it is. Side A and side B. Just make sure when it goes to the middle and the needle starts to scratch a bit, you flip it over. I guess that's the only thing I have to say. But this is super cool. And what a great blurb from Tom Slay as well. Ellen, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me. It was such a pleasure.
And anyone that's watching the live stream now that wants to come in for the open mic, use the link and I will let you in. Otherwise, I'll say goodnight to you and thanks for watching in the stream. I always appreciate and I'm sure Ellen and the authors appreciate you watching.